Welcome to Provoking Peace, a podcast by the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, where we bring Muslim and Jewish women and our allies into conversation to explore what it really takes to build peace in ourselves, our communities, and our world.
We go beyond the headlines to speak with people who are living this work every day: activists, educators, artists, faith leaders, and more.
We're here to ask bold questions, listen deeply, and invite you to join us in disrupting assumptions and stereotypes, one Muslim and
one Jewish woman at a time.
Today we have great honor and pleasure of having Julie Cohen and Mo Husseini with us, the filmmakers of A Path Forward documentary, and welcome to our podcast, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having us.
So Mo Husseini is a Palestinian-American filmmaker and writer. He co-directed The Path Forward with Julie Cohen, a documentary that amplifies Jewish and Palestinian voices seeking peace amidst the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Husseini is known for his viral post, 50 Completely True Things, and has been involved in various creative projects that explore themes of identity, culture, and reconciliation.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Cohen, who is an acclaimed documentary filmmaker known for her work on films such as RBG, Everybody, and The Path Forward. She identifies as a Jewish American and has a background in law and journalism. Her films often explore themes of justice, resilience, and social change. Cohen has received numerous accolades, including an Academy Award nomination, an Emmy, and a Peabody Award. She's active on social media platforms like Blue Sky as filmmaker Julie, where she shares insights into her work and advocacy. Welcome both.
Thank you for having us.
So I am going to jump in and share a little bit that the core of sisterhood, our organization's work, is that we really try to build our relationships, our advocacy, our work on creating and sharing personal narratives. We strongly believe that that's the best way to get to know each other and to create that respect and trust. So building on that philosophy that the sisterhood has, I wanted to ask both of you to bring that into our conversation and maybe share your own personal narratives with us a little bit and what led you to this work.
Yeah, I mean, my personal story, growing up a Jewish American person in the suburbs of DC, I've worked as a journalist and then got into documentary film kind of because it's such a great tool. Just like you said, the sisterhood's goal is to use personal narrative to explore the big themes of life. There's just no better way than personal storytelling to move towards a better, more empathetic world. So that's what I've tried to do some in my work. And although as a Jewish person and also as kind of a progressive, politically active kind of person, I certainly have cared a lot about Palestinian-Israeli issues over the years. It was not something I enjoyed talking about because it is so likely to provoke not peace, but provoke hostility. And, events, the horror of events in our world over the last year and a half made that choice feel, I would say, kind of untenable and wrong. How, if my whole work is trying to bring empathy into conversations that are important, how would you ignore the subject matter that's probably in need of empathy and lacking empathy so much more than almost any subject, and one that actually does have some personal resonance with me? And that's what led to actually Mo and I starting to talk, and then led to this project.
I grew up in a Palestinian narrative that was really focused on a Palestinian perspective on the struggle and a grounding in it in a very real sense, given that, up until I was 18, I actually lived in the Middle East and grew up there. And so for me, I actually came to university wanting to focus on like peace building and being part of, designing a solution and all this other stuff. And honestly, idealistic me kind of hit the wall of the collapse of Oslo and the death of Yitzhak Rabin, his assassination. And for me, I really stopped talking about the conflict with people. I just had so little hope and so a sense of futility, I guess. And really that stuck from the 90s all the way until, shortly after October 7th, where similar to Julie, I just felt like I can't just be quiet about this. Like this seems so important to talk about, the kinds of things that we both think are important. The idea of kind of seeing each other, both sides, and having a sense of, if not agreement, but just like empathy or understanding. I don't have to agree with you to understand you. And it's frustrating that the rest of the world kind of sees agreement as a prerequisite to decency, which I don't think should be the case at all. Like I don't think you have to agree in order to be basically respectful to each other.
Yeah. And conflict and love and conflict and respect are not, they're not on opposite sides. You can have all of those things together.
Absolutely.
Especially if you start with the personal, which is what's so great about your organization. And I think is very much mirrored in our film, that the people that are in the film are starting with the personal, are starting with getting to know one another and understanding some things and having a real sense of personal connection. It's one of the major tenets actually of feminism in America is the personal is political. And I think by design, by also the political is personal. And like, that's actually a huge insight. And it's what women tend to just naturally do when they get into the political realm, is to start making truly personal connections before you really start talk about family and pets and like there's a way to connect as human beings that actually is kind of politically important. And it's sad that it's done more. I mean, we have kind of the problem in America right now of like some leadership that is so lacking in like the basics of humanity that such a connection would be literally impossible. And like, I think that's part of our problem.
I think that's an incredibly deep insight. And if you actually look at what is happening in the Middle East, it's reflected.
And I think those conversations, so both of you are bringing up so many things that I would like to dig deeper on. And I think those, for me, it's not either or. It's either small conversation and that's where it's both, right? That kind of connection that is created really leads into deeper and more difficult conversations with respect, right? And with both of you are talking about humanity that is very often completely divorced from political arena. And it's all about power, and we lost that connection with humanity, and bringing back that humanity into every realm of our existence is what we would like to see happen. And I see it personally as the only cure to where we're at now with politics here and around the world. So
I think what happened in the former Yugoslavia is a great example of like how quickly we can go from being a country to being like intensely tribal and intensely impersonal and intensely focused on just like dehumanizing the other, right? I grew up in the Middle East with a lot of friends in the diplomatic corps and people who were Yugoslav from the Yugoslav embassy, that we went to school with, and there were, Serbs and there was Croats, but look, it was a mix of everybody. And it was like within a year, everything just went boom. And I think that it takes work to recognize humanity. I think it takes work to remind ourselves that our tribes are actually less important than the things that we share despite our tribes and our religions and, national origins or political parties or whatever it may be.
And I think those simple things, about your pets and what you ate for dinner and, your children and your parents, those are the things that humanize you. Those are the things where you realize how much you have in common at sort of the base human level. And once you make that connection, then it's easier to listen with, without judgment and with respect, once you have that basis, that foundation.
Yeah. And there are certain things that can, just as there are things that can give that, there are things that take it away. Aziz Abu Sarah, who is one of the main characters in our film and grew up on the West Bank, makes the pretty interesting point that it wasn't until he was 18 and decided that he would take some Hebrew lessons so that he could advance himself kind of professionally in the region, which was a smart call on his or his parents' part. That was the first time where he met some students and a Hebrew teacher. He said, that was the first time I'd met someone who was Jewish, who wasn't either a soldier or a settler, someone, literally occupying my land, and his experience with those people are like those are people that like smash the windows of my car or are like vandalizing my family's home. So are you going to be able to build a warm relationship talking with pets about pets in those situations? Like, of course you're not. As soon as he met someone as a person, and he had this sort of incredible and very compassionate Hebrew teacher, and just like his whole worldview completely changed because he's, both a smart and a lovely human being. He really took that experience to heart and let it change his perspective on how he dealt with other people in a way that comes out extremely clearly in everything he does and in our film.
Amidar, who is one of the people that we interviewed in our film, has this line where he talks about, the idea that the worth of a single dead child is in any way a function of that child's nationality or religion or origin is, it's horrible. Like that's not a way any of us should be. I think you lose a part of your humanity when you diminish the humanity of other people. And that's, I think, what both of us have been advocating against, and both of us have been kind of focused on with the film, and that's, I think, what both of us have been advocating against, pairs of people who are focused on actually recognizing and elevating each other's humanity.
Well, I think that's actually a perfect segue, because I think that, that there are people that may listen to this podcast that won't have had an opportunity to see the film yet. And so I was hoping that you could kind of give an overview of listen to this podcast that won't have had an opportunity to see the film yet. And so I was hoping that you could kind of give an overview of the film to give the rest of the conversation a little bit, more context.
Sure. So basically, our film looks at three different pairs of Palestinian and Israeli Jewish duos that basically are going around the world. Most of the film takes place in the US or Western Europe, kind of talking about, as the title says, like the path forward, like talking about their own narratives a fair amount, talking about connection. We sort of discovered when we started looking, after the horrible period of October 7th and then the war in Gaza that followed, like when you start listening to voices talking about this, whether it's on your nightly news or cable shows or social media, or sometimes even among like friends and acquaintances at the dinner table, like the tenor of the conversation was so crushingly unhelpful that's what led both Mo and I, kind of like in our personal lives, and also as it turned out in our filmmaking, to look for the question of actually, are there more useful, helpful voices out there? And what we were shocked to find is that there are so many of them. It's not which is why, even though our film is a short 40-minute film, we actually have a lot of people in it, because we wanted you to see these people are not anomalous. There are plenty of people who see one another as human beings and want to publicly be associated with that worldview. And those are, we chose just some of them, some of the ones who are most eloquent and who happen to be going on speaking tours. And we're like, let's just film this, put it together, have some interviews that let you understand what their backstories are?
I think the object lesson of our film, in a lot of ways, is if you look at, you know, I think this is true to some extent of everybody we profile, but it is deeply and particularly true of Aziz and Maoz, who are dealing with almost unimaginable loss. I mean, truly, right? Like Aziz's brother, whom he idolized growing up, like this was his hero, is beaten up so severely in an Israeli jail that he basically is released for medical reasons and dies outside of jail, right? And so not technically killed in jail, but everybody can do math. And then on the flip side, you have Maoz, who's, his last contact with his parents was at like 7 in the morning or something like that on October 7th, where his dad says we're going into the safe house. And that's the last time he talked to them. I mean, his parents were brutally murdered on October 7th. And for us, the idea that two people who have, by every rational standard, like if you look at Maoz or you look at Aziz, it would be very easy for us to go like, oh, I understand why he's so right-wing and anti-Arab. I mean, his parents were killed on, and vice versa for Aziz, right? Oh, I understand why he's so anti-Israeli or whatever. It would be so easy, and they would have every humane excuse in the world to be these like completely rigid and very extreme people on the issue. And yet what you have is people who, despite loss that would break me, I mean, it would absolutely break me to live through the kinds of losses that they have lived through. Despite that, they find a way to sit with each other, and not just sit with each other, but become legitimately friends. I mean, Julie and I have had the honor of spending a lot of time with these guys. It's not fake. Like it's not some shtick that they're doing for the stage. Like they're lovely human beings and they care deeply about each other. And that has only happened, I think, partially because of their loss, but also partially because they have seen each other and acknowledged each other and been there for each other to both acknowledge the loss and help repair it in ways that don't have anything to do with the politics or the issues, just as human beings of like, dude, I get it.
Right. The loss actually gives them something in common. You could certainly respond a very different way, but it like in some ways they have a personal connection beyond what a lot of us could understand. And that's actually a theory behind, there's a whole organization, the Parents Circle, that are people who are bereaved, who've lost children or other family members in the conflict. And, I don't want to be so naive as to claim that people who lose a family member in the conflict like necessarily gravitate to each other and are loving and touchy-feely and want to make peace. That isn't the most common response, but it's also not a rare response. It is something that actually happens to scores of people. Like these organizations are not tiny. Like there's a fair number of people whose reaction when they have the worst happen to them is like, you know what? Doesn't there need to be another way? Like,
look, I think acknowledgement is a secret weapon.
Mhm.
And the reason I say that is that people who have suffered often like know that you can't fix it. You can't unkill my parents. You can't unkill my brother. You can't give me back the years that I've lost because of X, Y, or Z. What you can do is acknowledge that it happened. And to acknowledge that it happened without adding a but or well, or like in some way try to either minimize it or pull back from it, or it drives me crazy when I hear people make the but statements. It's like, well, this thing that happened to the Palestinians, it's really bad, but and now I'm going to say something terrible, and vice versa. Oh, well, the Israelis, I feel really bad about 10/7, but, and now there's like, a pile of other things that I'm going to do. Like, no one wants to deal with the but. Like, how can, we can get to the issues dealt with in the but without making it a but. We can say, this thing that happened to you is awful. End of sentence, end of conversation. I don't need to like contextualize it or apologize for it or make it better. We can acknowledge it and now we can move on to other things. People just don't do that. Not everybody, but like, I mean, a lot of people, and particularly in politics, because they feel like that if I acknowledge any aspect of your pain, it somehow diminishes mine, that it detracts from mine, that pain is a zero-sum game, that suffering is a zero-sum game, that justice is a zero-sum game. And I think, it's not. It's a magical, it's a magical pie that everybody can have a slice of without ever diminishing the pie.
We start our film with sort of telling of an anecdotal story about after, Maoz's parents were killed, Aziz, who didn't know Maoz well. They're both in the travel industry, so they had met once and they were Facebook friends. And, when Aziz learned that Maoz's parents were killed on October 7th, like, these aren't people that are in regular touch. He was just like, wait, oh God, I know that dude. That's terrible. And he reached out to say that he was heartbroken. And like hearing him, that small, beautiful act of grace, hearing that he did that and hearing how much it meant to Maoz just totally, to me, just like completely opens up like not only my heart, but like really opens up my thinking about like a lot of it. Just sets a tone that really has an impact on how one thinks about things. And I would say that I would, later in the film, Aziz on a stage is kind of giving a little bit of a taste of like how harrowing and painful it was to grow up under occupation. That's a situation that I, as an informed person, was certainly intellectually aware of. Like, if you had asked me, like, was that bad? I'd be like, yeah, that must be terrible. But, like, I don't think I really ever really allowed myself to feel how bad that is and what it must be like until I had heard it from Aziz, because I understand who Aziz is. Like, in some ways, maybe it doesn't speak so well of me, but that's just like part of human nature. Like what makes me feel compassionate to Aziz is like feeling a connection to him that is based on understanding the compassionate and also sort of maybe separately like hilarious person that he is. Like, you sort of know the person, you're like, wait, so I think that is sort of the magic of what the people in our film are doing.
I'm a survivor of Siege of Sarajevo. So usually when I was talking about healing, it is, you have different reactions to what happened to you in life. And that also came through your film. These people chose a different path. These people chose their deepest, most difficult experiences to extend that hand that you were talking about and provide that sort of hopeful glimpse into the grandiosity of human nature, right? That can be. So that's what I've been really getting from your film, and it was very, very inspiring. And I know it really speaks for a lot of people who have gone through conflicts in not just Israel, Palestine.
It's funny, when the campus protests were going on, I guess in kind of the late spring of last year, I ended up on a Jewish spirituality call where Rabbi Josh Fagelson was interviewing Rabbi Sharon Brous. And there was a lovely thing that she said that just stuck with me. And she was talking about the need to distinguish between the idea of safety and the idea of being uncomfortable, right? Like that we shouldn't expect anybody to stay in a space where they feel unsafe. And she very much defined that, in a certain way. But the idea of being okay to sit in your own uncomfortableness is a very different thing. And I think that when you see someone like Aziz reach out to Mo, like, I can certainly put, those shoes on and be like, I wouldn't know what to say. Like, how do you send an email to someone that's literally just lost their parents in like this horrific thing, right? Like, deeply uncomfortable. But instead of just saying like, you know what, I'll reach out to him in a few weeks or blah, 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 or whatever the heck it is. Like he lent into it and just felt that as a human, this was something he needed to do. And it had an impact. And I think that there is a calling for all of us to kind of step into the uncomfortable sometimes. Not the unsafe, but the uncomfortable, and to acknowledge that we all have utterly subjective perspectives on the world, right? Like no one has an objective perspective on anything. That it just does not exist. And because of that, I think there's a sense of humbleness that you have to find to understand that your perspective, however strongly you believe it, is only a single shard of a much greater truth. And that truth may need very opposing and different perspectives to completely fill it out. And that, like I said, takes being uncomfortable.
That is something that we emphasize in our conversations in the sisterhood. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Creating the space, we were always talking about brave space. I mean, a safe space, sorry.
Yeah.
It was sort of a let's create a safe space. And now we're all thinking a little bit more about let's create a brave and safe space, right? Where nobody wants to be unsafe. However, let's provoke, as our podcast is, let's provoke these deeper conversations where we really work with our own vulnerabilities, right? Aziz was very vulnerable when he called Moaz to express that. And it could have gone all kinds of ways, right? That initial conversation. But it really turned out to be something priceless for their friendship and for both of their communities. So it is very present, what we are trying really hard to work on here in the sisterhood as well.
I honestly don't mean to, like falsely flatter you, but I do think that you're doing all the right work, right? Like I think that the kinds of groups where people are bringing together people who are different in order to focus on the ways that they're similar are really critical. Like I really do believe that I don't actually see a solution to the Israel, Palestine conflict situation, whatever you want to call it, until we get to a place where we're able to acknowledge each other and be uncomfortable in some of the conversations. I mean, I think one of the best and frankly there's two successful examples are, Ireland and South Africa. And in both situations, there were a lot of deeply uncomfortable conversations and deeply uncomfortable revelations and deeply uncomfortable things that people on both sides had to step up and say, yeah, I did bad things, but that's the way to move forward.
Yeah, and true reckonings in a way that's actually at this stage, I feel like, Mo, almost impossible to imagine happening. But but people might have said that in South Africa before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did what it did. But before getting to that level of difficulty, we have the other situation, like we're based here. You guys are based here also. Yeah. Like our whole thought is like I kind of get why people that are in an active war zone, that's not a time to be in a peace-loving kind of mood. But here in this country, where our lives at this point still have some relative comfort and ease surrounding them, please, can't we find a way where we have so much in common that actually has nothing to do with our ethnicity or religion, or where we're living in society together? There's ways, and I think particularly your group with a focus of women, there are ways that we know and understand how to get along with one another. And certainly when you talk about, I don't know if funny is quite the right word, but a thing that always feels worth noting to me is the societal vibe of a Jewish American, along with, contrasted from a Muslim American or Christian Arab American, or there's a lot more sort of cultural and personality similarity among our peoples, if you want to contrast to the larger like Protestant majority. Like what shock and you know, I mean, I know your group is a little bit broader, but like if you want to get specific, like Mo is not the first Palestinian American friend of mine. I have some Palestinian American friends, although talking about the conflict is complicated and difficult, and in some cases not something that we've done. But like there's a familiarity. Like leave aside the tricky stuff. Like Palestinian Americans and Jewish Americans are so freaking similar in everything about their way they behave and like the way that their mothers like loom over their lives, and some things having to do with food and like the way, you know, the like incessant and sometimes as the, when you're in the younger generation, painful like pressure to be educated. Like there's just like actually a ton.
Oh yeah.
There is a ton of similarity between our peoples, which may have something to do with why it's hard to get along sometimes. Like, are we the easiest people in the world? Like, maybe not. But like, are we also like the hilariously and like there's just like a lot of similarity.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry, Mo. I just wanted to jump in with saying what is important is, you know, even looking historically at Muslim and Jewish communities around the world, right? Before, if we don't look at the last 80 years, there is so much of interaction and living together. And that's what we are trying to explore on our travels. And just there is so much overlap, not just culturally, how I would say even spiritually. And our scriptures there's identical sayings, right? You just kind of find the same verse in both scriptures and build values on that as well.
There are so many similarities in how we're seen by outsiders and how kind of we see ourselves in terms of sort of the narrative in the US. So there's just so many points, you know, of intersection there. We talk about that a lot in the sisterhood.
You've got two people who are fundamentally like similar. You know, like I was just talking with a friend of mine yesterday about how I just like I feel more comfortable in visiting Jewish friends or going to like a Seder or going to like a Shabbat, you know, dinner than I do going to like, you know, like a house in the Midwest for somebody's like Sunday dinner for like a, you know, a Protestant family or evangelical family. Like to me, that's just like, I do not understand, you know, and I don't say that dismissively. I'm just like, it's just very different. Whereas, you know, despite all that culture would tell you about the differences between Palestinians and Israelis, like you find like Jewish spaces like familiar. And I mean, you know, it's like it's got a different accent to it, but it's very much the same book, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, an iftar, you know, is very, very, very similar to, you know, to a break fast.
100%.
You know, I mean, it's, you know, there's really you know, you're not having bagels at an iftar, but you know, there's lots of things that are very,
we
very
have,
similar.
you know, but like here's the thing, like yes, you're not having bagels, but we are having karek, which are like literally look like bigger bagels.
With all these similarities and everything, but what I noticed in your film as well is that you let these people speak about real issues that they're faced with, right? So they do bring up, it's not all, you know, yes, it's very healing, but they do talk about power imbalance. They do talk about what's happening on the ground, how they're living their daily lives. And I appreciate that aspect that you're bringing up in your film, that you are not neglecting that piece. And it's almost this and this, right? You're bringing both of these narratives into conversation. Can you speak a little bit more to that sort of bringing both?
I mean, I would say everything in our film, everything about the way we put the film together came from the people who are in the film. Like they inspired the film, and their way of addressing the conflict is the vocabulary and style of the film. And in terms of the point that the film makes about the imbalance of suffering and about, sort of by definition, I mean, I hate to sort of put it in the American political terminology of things, but about the privilege of the Israeli Jewish half of the story, that the emphasis on that really came from the people in the film who raised it in interviews, and particularly both Sally Abed, the Palestinian now political figure in Israel, who's now a city council member, and Riman Barakat, really both wanted to make that point, especially I think when they're talking to Westerners, like talking to people in the US, like you've got to understand, they have a really good point to bring that out, because truthfully, if you watch the American news, you wouldn't get that. What you see an imbalance of the coverage. You see Israeli loss and suffering being portrayed as really getting to know individual, particularly hostages, because of the focus that happens. Like the whole idea of taking hostages is to be able to focus a nation's attention on a few people. So you really sort of came to know who the hostages were as human beings, whereas suffering in Gaza tended to be portrayed by like flattened buildings. Mm-hmm. Like just like destruction of, whole square miles worth of, like, by the way, this used to be apartments where people lived, and now like this is rubble, and here's like a human face of somebody who's missing. And it makes it very hard because actually seeing a person's face is what inspires empathy and humanity. So as a result, I think I can really only speak for how we feel in America, but in America, unless you're seeking out other sources of information, you're not getting the sense of the imbalance of suffering. And when we watch Sally's full interview, we noticed that she used a phrase again and again, which is like, this needs to be said, this needs to be acknowledged, she would say when she was talking about something, particularly when she was talking about this imbalance of suffering that you're mentioning, Tahia. And we were also like, oh, she's right. Like, she's saying this needs to be said. And like that, maybe that's but actually what she's saying is like, you need to hear this. And I would say, I mean, that interview was with me, and I would say she was like, part of that was like, hi, Jewish American, you actually need to hear what I'm saying here and put it in the movie that is being made. And I listened and was like, it's interesting how the process of making it, when she said it in the interview, I didn't hear it. Like it didn't, because you're actually worried about making sure the time is tight and you're trying to cover everything you have to cover. And like, oh my God, is there a hair in her face that we have to fix? So, but when you watch the interview later, she's like, oh, she's actually saying something to me here. She's like, you need to hear this, and it has to be in the film. And like, I think she's right. And so we put it in the film, and it was particularly on that point. And then it became clear, actually, other people made this point as well. And I see that these are people that are expressing a frustration that is deeply valid and that we wanted the film to address.
I think that goes to an earlier topic that we were talking about, which is this idea of acknowledgement. And I think that a lot of Palestinians get really wound around the axle on the fact that media just will not acknowledge Palestinian suffering with anything like equity, right? Like I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm not asking you to apologize for it. I'm not asking you to any of these things, but at least tell the story. I do think that because of that, like, what starts to happen on some level, both between Israelis and Palestinians, is what I call trauma Olympics, right? Well, actually, this terrible thing happened to us. Oh, yeah, like there's all this, like I heard this figure over and over at the beginning, right after 10/7 of like, oh, imagine, like, given the population of Israel, like if you took that number and that would be like, X million people in the United States being killed, right? And it's like, that is a great way to contextualize what happened on 10/7. but not once did I hear anyone go like, oh, and by the way, let's contextualize the numbers in Gaza vis-a-vis the Palestinian population to understand what that would mean in that context. And that's the point. It's not to deny Israeli suffering. It's not to minimize it in any way, shape, or form, but it is to ask for acknowledgement that kind of, but once again, Palestinians kind of end up struggling with. And I think that, the film and the people we profile in the film show a great way forward through that, right? Like nobody has to apologize for anything. I just want you to acknowledge it. I just want you to not pretend that these things didn't happen, right? It's in, and it happens to Jews, right? When people talk about the Holocaust, they're like, well, it wasn't, it didn't really happen, or, but like, what the heck are you like? What are you talking about? Like how do you deny these things that happened? And I think that a lot of, and this is not to equate the Holocaust to anything else, but my point is like it's critical to acknowledge the things that happen to people. It's important to say that they happened. It gives people a sense of respect for their suffering that I think is critical.
And of course, it's hard to acknowledge what people are like profoundly ignorant about. And I think that's a big problem. And I think, Allison, if you were raised in, I don't know to what extent you were raised with a religious education, I think there's this huge, there's a problem with the way that Jewish Americans are educated about history in that region of the world. I mean, their school, I literally don't remember learning anything about Israel at school. Like if they taught, like I just don't remember. Like I learned about a lot of things in the world, it didn't come up. Maybe people were like nervous about bringing it up even back then. Where I did learn about it was in Sunday school at Temple. Like I learned a lot, and what I learned was not the truth. Like that's it. Like I've said this to my brother and to my cousins, including cousins of younger generations, to see if we were on the same page and thinking about this. And we were, and my husband as well, all of whom went to, religious education at Reformed temples in America. I really can't think of any area in my education where I was so misinformed and frankly lied to about the history as in what Sunday school taught. Like I don't remember anyone really there was a desert. That's what I was told. I was told there was a desert, and we made it bloom with like our nice kibbutzes and all that stuff. Like I don't remember. I didn't learn anything about any Nakba until way into adulthood, and that was because I was sort of paying attention to politics, and it just was. It's not that erasure isn't even the right word, because something like pencil has to be on paper before you erase it. It was Mo, I see you there, you're right there, you were not there, and you could get even creepier about it and say that there actually is some politics behind that also, because there was an active idea to try to get people, Jewish Americans, on board with the Israeli with things about Israel that involved just a complete wiping out of the painful truths, which is sad.
And the mirroring is fascinating because I grew up in the Middle East, and I still remember you'd get a textbook that had a map in it from an American school or publisher or English publisher, and it would say Israel on it, and they would literally Sharpie out the word Israel, right? And it's what did you achieve with? Exactly nothing. You achieved nothing. Nothing about the state of Israel was changed by you Sharpieing out the name Israel on a map that went to a bunch of grade school students in Kuwait, right? All it did was created some weird set of impressions or ideas with those grade school students, right? You're setting up a world where, because of the fact that we refuse to learn about each other, that we refuse to acknowledge each other, that we refuse to honor kind of the paths and the sufferings and the successes that we've gone through, that we actually don't even have a common truth to discuss. Like I've seen conversations between people who are less than open, let me put it that way, on both sides, but Palestinians and Israelis who like come to it, and you realize that they literally do not see the same world. They do not see the same situation at all. Like the situations that they are both looking at, there are almost no similarities,
So it is interesting. Yeah, sorry, Mo. I think that's very interesting that you're saying that. And it is what I hear from Israelis and Palestinians, people, the same people you filmed for this film, is they have much more of a deeper perspective and openness, these people, and they understand deeper how much their lives are intertwined. And I heard in your film over and over ago, nobody is going anywhere, right? It is
100%.
with almost every single person mentioned it almost, right?
But also continually in my conversations online is magical thinking, right? It's this idea that like, some combination of things that Palestinians do are going to make, Israelis like wake up on Tuesday and go like, you know what? Just kidding. Like, this is like, we're out of here. Like, you guys can have it all, and we're just going to go. And the same thing is true on the other side. Like, well, if we do some magical combination of things to the Palestinians, they're just going to go like, you know what? Like, yeah, we tried, and yeah, it didn't work. So I'm going to go to Jordan and become Jordanian or become Egyptian or whatever. Like, it's fundamentally like magical thinking. To me, it's just as powerful as hoping that Santa, leads one of his reindeer for you to find on Christmas morning. It's just not going to happen. And we spend so much time on both sides indulging in that magical thinking. I have heard so many Palestinians and so many Israelis like come to a place where it's like, okay, great, what's the solution? And they'll lay out the steps of the solution. And at some point there's like a piece of magical, Deus ex machina thing that happens, and then all of a sudden, all the Jews are going to go back to Europe, or all the Arabs are going to leave and go to another country. Like nobody's leaving. We have three options: the Israelis kill every single Palestinian, and I mean every single Palestinian, or the Palestinians kill every single Israeli, and I mean every single Israeli, or we figure out how to live together. And the argument that I would make is that unless you are a psychopath in a clinical sense, the first two options are not real options, right? We're just going to have to figure out, we're going to have to muddle our way to living together. We're going to have to muddle our way to giving each other the grace to have some sense of security, to have some sense of independence, to have some sense of freedom for each other.
A great line which has been used by political activists throughout time. Martin Luther King loved to say it. I believe it actually comes from Emma Lazarus, who the historic Jewish American woman who wrote the poem on the Statue of Liberty, like, which is like, until all of us are free, there ain't none of us, like, none of us are free. And like our people in our film make that point again and again, that our fates are actually tied to each other in a way that's deep and not bad. Like that's actually, no, it's good to have your fate tied to people with whom there has been like the shared fate is actually good. That's actually what gives the path forward. But like, I don't know, are we going to see that?
You're never going to get to a solution without learning to talk to each other. And I think Israelis want people to force the Palestinians to accept things, and Palestinians want people to force the Israelis to accept things. And the reality is that nobody's forcing anybody to do anything. Like these are people who have to come to the table and figure it out for themselves. Like when I'm asked, for example, what do you think the solution is or whatever, my response is very clear. I'm American. I have a connection to that country, but like I'm not going to write checks that other people need to cash. Right. So I have desires for what a solution delivers, and that is peace and security for everybody from the river to the sea. And I don't mean in any country. Like everybody from the river to the sea should be free and happy and safe and have a way to have a fruitful and meaningful life. Israelis, Arabs, Jews, everybody, Palestinians. It doesn't matter to me what the details of that are, because I think that the people who have to decide on the details of that are the people who have to live that and engage with it on a daily basis. I think the argument we're making is that you're never going to get to that acceptance of each other unless you start acknowledging each other and seeing each other and following the examples that, yes, 6 people in our film, but also thousands of other Palestinians and Israelis working together and engaging in any number of peace efforts and community efforts,
It's such a treat speaking with both of you, really, and learning from both of you. I want to say that yes, it's people that you presented in this film that they told their stories, but knowing how films work through your editing and through you told your stories and your message and so I appreciate your bravery and your commitment to bring that message to us here, right? Because it could have been a whole different way of editing these stories that people shared. Yet what you did is really gave them a very strong voice and brought up some very, very important issues for us to hear and think about. I wanted to just ask you quickly if there is one sort of from your experience or us here in the US, and many of our members and sisterhood members are here in the US. What is our role here? What would you say is on us here to be doing? I know people there will be deciding, but what is our role in all this?
Yeah, I would say don't be overwhelmed by the hugeness of the problem and the trauma and the conflict. Like a small step is a small step. Gathering with like-minded people and talking about the need even for a path forward and the idea that acknowledging of our shared humanity is in and of itself worthwhile and is like forming communities that believe in provoking peace. It is not nothing. Like it's not like I don't know. Is there a Palestinian equivalent for the phrase "it's not chopped liver"? I will give the Jewish thing is like doing like a little piece of work for provoking peace and like joining and hugging and sharing a meal and breaking bread and talking like that. Like my Jewish side, I'll leave the Palestinian messaging to Mo. The Jewish messaging is that ain't chopped liver.
There you go. I guess I'll say this. There's a great line that I've heard both Maoz and Aziz deliver both times, and it's separately. And the line is, I can forgive the failures of the past, and I can forgive the failures of the present. But what I can't forgive is the failures of the future. And what they both mean by that is that in a lot of ways, there's a lot of people who are just kind of resigned, like, and you see this particularly from non-Israeli, non-Palestinian people, where it's, ends up being some version of, it's like messed up over there. You're never gonna solve it, like whatever. And then, another person in the film, Sally Abed, has this line in there where she says, cynicism is a privilege. Like when you're being cynical about this thing, like, yes, you can be cynical about it, but this is my life. This is my parents' life. This is where I live. This is what I have to deal with on a daily basis. I don't have the privilege of that cynicism. I've got to find a way through it. And so I think, if I could give people a message for what to do if you're here and not, quote unquote, part of it, resist the urge to see things in black and white and understand that there are sure, there are villains, but the vast majority of people in this are not villains. The vast majority of people in this math are regular people who just want to get on with their lives. And I think that that is true for Israelis. I think that is true for Palestinians. And helping people who are in trauma. And I think that that is true for Israelis, and I think that that is true for Palestinians. I think both people are in trauma. Helping people in trauma process that trauma and get to a better place is kind of the job for all of us. It's resisting the shorthand, resisting the black and white, resisting the stereotypes on both sides, and moving to just, we can get to peace if we can at least get to sitting down and acknowledging each other. Like there's an order of operations.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, for talking with us, for answering our questions, for sharing your incredible film with these. I feel like we see so much polarization on the news, and it's just coming at us from all sides, this sort of tribalism and polarization. And your film shows a different path, that you don't have to fall into those. It doesn't have to be that dichotomy. You can do something different. And your film just illustrates that so beautifully. And that it can start with just a simple conversation, a simple, I hear you, I see you. It was really meaningful and powerful.
Thank you so much.
It's an honor and pleasure.
Are there any questions you've always wanted to ask a Jew or a Muslim, but didn't know how or where to go? Ask us at podcast@sosspeace.org. We don't speak for everyone in our communities, but we're happy to give you answers from our own perspectives. And to learn more about the sisterhood, subscribe to the newsletter on our website, sosspeace.org.
If this conversation moved you, challenged you, or made you think, we'd love for you to share it, leave a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The opinions of speakers and hosts do not always reflect official positions of the sisterhood. All rights to video and audio content belong to the sisterhood. Until next time, keep listening,
keep learning,
and keep provoking peace.